Bridges are the physical manifestation of people wanting to be connected. And I think that's pretty beautiful. So I wanted to look at the bridges in Pokémon Legends ZA. Pokémon Legends ZA takes place entirely in Lumio City, which has 5 different sectors. So when I went about looking at all the bridges, I decided to go sector by sector. And I hate to announce it, but we actually only have to look at 2 different sectors throughout the city, with a little bit of an asterisk. Before we even get to any of the bridges that are unique to Lumio City and constructed before the events of the game, I wanted to talk briefly about the ones that the player will interact with when they are going from rooftop to rooftop. And one of those is these little spiderweb bridges. Prior to the player using a Pokemon to interact with them, it's actually just a bundle of webbing, which is pretty cool, and it shows our little interaction. Also, as we're walking, we can hear the change in our footsteps. Obviously, we hear the metal of the rooftop above us, or I guess below us in this case, but then we go to the webbing, and it's got a little stretchiness, a little buoyancy to it. Unfortunately, the spiderweb itself doesn't move, and actually, when I was looking at the bridges for the first time, this spiderweb right here, if you listen carefully, I thought that little back and forth pacing was to give the idea of the spiderweb moving, but no. I was simply hearing the Trubbish that is sleeping right below. Aren't they adorable? But at least with this collection of spiderweb bridges, I really like it because if we follow all the way over, we can see probably one of the culprits, the Spinnerack right here. This piece right here is actually part of the construction company, and they just put a slab across just so that, you know, they could walk across. Obviously, the real reason is that the developers needed a reason for the player to be able to walk across, so they just kind of put this one dangerous, very loose-fitting slab that could realistically fall over at any time. Now, if we look at this one right here, this once again points to the construction company, but it seems like their safety is very wishy-washy on when they decide to have a bit more of a safe travel across a given gap, as this one has proper hand railing, and it seems like it is more affixed to the structure that it is crossing, as we see here, as opposed to that other one that was literally just a slab of metal across a big old large gap. It is very convenient that seemingly anyone who has a phone would actually be fine falling, but still a little concerning that they don't want people to not fall. Like the Spinnerack webs before, another bridge that the player makes is these little ice bridges. There's initially an ice crystal, and then when your Pokemon interacts with it, it creates this little ice bridge that we can cross, which it does have a unique sound as we're walking across. I don't know if I'd call this personally an ice sound. It feels more akin to like a freshly done snow, but still cool nonetheless. And obviously they did not make the choice to make this slippery. I mean, I feel like my character's got some pretty hefty boots on, so it wouldn't be a problem for them, but at least normally I would think this would be a little slippery. Obviously, this comes down to game development, because why would they have a slippery mechanic just for the ice bridges that the player makes? It wouldn't really make a whole lot of sense, and especially because they don't use a slippery mechanic in like the Rogue Mega Evolution battles. Why make it just so then somebody walks across a bridge, you know? And then the last bridge that the player will see on rooftops is these little vine bridges right here. Obviously, before we were able to point out that the environmental factor of Spinnerack was here, and they ran away just a moment ago, but there was a couple of Badoo here. So it asks the question, is Badoo the one making these vine branches, or is this just naturally occurring flora that's trying to reach its way towards other grass, as we can see right here? Ultimately, the express purpose of all of these is to give the players a quick way to go from rooftop to rooftop, especially without having to do any Rotom glides before the ability is unlocked. As I previously mentioned, there are only 2 districts that have actual bridges, and that is the Jean district and the Verde district. which is a shame because I really like seeing bridges, and especially because the few unique ones we see, I really enjoy. So we're actually going to start at the intersection of the two, specifically in Wild Zone 11. As we enter Wild Zone 11, we actually see two different paths, and we can see two different types of bridges, and it makes sense. So this stretch of water here is the Seizen Canal, which runs through the entirety of Lumio City, and we can see, because of the water, this area right here is pretty muddy. So it makes sense for the two paths that they wouldn't put as much effort into it, as people don't want to get mud on their shoes. But they still give us a little bit of path so folks can walk over it. But for the main path that they expect people to use, there's this very nice brick bridge with an arch. There's not a whole lot of decorations. We'll actually see on a few of the other ones, like specific Pokemon are built into the design. It's a very standard bridge. It's got a nice arch, elevation, right over the water, and ta-da. If we actually leave Wild Zone 11, we can actually walk right up these stairs and see the exact same design right up here. Which does kind of give some cohesion to this sort of giant, more natural area of the city. Obviously, the Wild Zone was implemented throughout the course of the game, but at one point they had these similar bridges to give it sort of a cohesion of this entire little park and natural area. And before we continue on to the bridges that are actually in the city, I want to look at the bridge that's in Wild Zone 2. So while we're looking at Wild Zone bridges, this one is pretty cool. So this is a different material. We do see it's used as wood again, but we can see there's actually a little bit of what looks like wet spots on the texture. And of course it makes sense because these Magikarp love to hop onto here. It does make it appear like the bridge is frequently experiencing some sort of like interaction with water. And of course it makes sense because Magikarp is hopping on the deck and flopping like a fish right here, which is really cool. I really like that. Otherwise, it is a very standard, nice open wooden bridge. Obviously, there's also no handrails, so folks could fall into it pretty easy. This is Wild Zone 2, so we know early on this was one of the Wild Zones that were implemented into Lumio City, so maybe they decided not to, especially because wood would theoretically be the easiest to build instead of having to deal with something like brick or stone or especially sheets of metal. But we see the same bridge 3 different times. And directly out of Wild Zone 2 is our next bridge. See, this one is a completely different material. We can actually see a giant steel beam. It's got an arch into it, but the bridge itself is flat. And we can actually see it's got some very nice handrails, and it's got a wood finish on the top. The main objective of this wood finish is so that when we walk across, we're hearing wood. And we're not clacking on big old sheets of metal. So this style of bridge, this sort of like bluish green metal work with the wood finish on top, we can actually see several different times throughout the vert sector. And we can actually see all 3 of them right next to each other. Obviously, these are pretty different because they are much larger. And we are also seeing some lampposts on the side. There are lampposts throughout Lumio City that have Pumpkaboo in their decorations. Let me see if this one right over here has it. Yes, it does. So we can see that this lamppost right here has Pumpkaboo in its decoration. And while these don't, we actually see the first time, at least in our little bridge observation, where a Pokemon is in the design of the bridge. I assume this is either a gold or maybe a bronze medal, maybe a fool's gold. I'm not going to pretend like I know my medals, but of the Pokemon Aurorus. And we can actually see it is repeating quite a few times on this bridge. These bridges are much larger. These are some of the largest in the game, and it's very, very cool. These bridges go over the Corlant waterway, and it makes sense because a bridge most often is going over some sort of cavern, or especially in this case, a body of water. Makes sense. Don't want to get your shoes wet. But there's actually one instance, and it's the only time this is the case, where there is a bridge that is not going over a body of water, and it is this bridge right here that leads into Area 17. This instead has an underpass, but As we can see, this is a very large road, and while we don't see cars really going through Lumio City, at least we don't see them in movement, we know that there is a taxi system. In fact, we can see it right here. So of course, why is that bridge there? Well, of course, it's for the cars. It's for the taxis that are driving throughout Lumio City. So it makes sense because now we have the option as a resident or visitor of Lumio City to go, well, I'm not waiting on this car. They drive so wild. That Zack character should not be trusted behind the wheel. It's a shame there's so few designs for bridges. When I was first looking into this, I had thought that maybe, oh, since this is in the vert sector, and this is using a bluish-green material, maybe there's bridges in the other sectors of the game, and they use some sort of material that would emulate the color of the sector. But that is not the case. Especially that brick bridge that was over by Wild Area 11, both inside and outside of it. That's just brick that's used inside of it. Now, if we head over to Wild Area 6, we can actually see another one of this Aurora's bridges design. The lampposts are only on the end this time, and there's only one instance of Aurora's in the design, and that's just because it's a shorter bridge. And if we enter Wild Area 6, we actually see the exact same design. I think it's safe to say that on a developer side of things, this is likely the same model copied and pasted. And of course, why make your job harder? And once again, this is going over a body of water. Now, speaking of going over body of waters, I want to show my favorite bridge in the game. And if you're looking at the thumbnail, you're probably already thinking, hey, where the heck is that bridge? Well, it is going over the Seisen Canal. Another thing just leading up to this bridge that I really like is this brick, or I guess cobblestone? What do we call that? It's certainly like a tile look. But regardless, along this canal specifically is this sort of wavy pattern on the sidewalk. And it is only found next to the canal. And I think that's very cool. But walking up, going to the canal, we can see this giant Soul Rock bridge. There's the stairs to get up onto it. And look at that. There are also little emblems of Lunatone. This bridge is absolutely fantastic. It caught my eye immediately on my first playthrough. It does connect the different districts, the two that have bridges, funny enough. And it goes right along the Seisen sector, or Seisen Canal. And we can actually see the columns here. See, the columns here actually have this pointed design, and that is because of the flowing water of the canal. Since these columns are sitting inside the water, they need to account for that movement. So that's why they have these little pointed edges, so that the water can break instead of just crashing against a flat surface. That hasn't been the case with the other bridges because those columns aren't submerged in water like these are. Once again, like I said, this is easily my favorite bridge. I really, really like it. I love the Soul Rock and Lunatone designs. It is just overall very, very cool. If we head on over to Centrico Plaza, we can actually see the same wooden bridge design that was used in Wild Zone 2. And it does still have that texture implying like recently splashed wood or maybe even possible rot. But it makes sense on this because in Wild Zone 20, there's some pretty powerful Pokemon. So we can assume they're splashing water quite a bit. I mentioned that Seisen Canal crosses all of Lumio City. And the only places to cross it are that Soul Rock Bridge right here, Centrico Plaza, and Magenta Plaza. Though technically Magenta Plaza itself could just be a very large round bridge, it doesn't have the bridge feel. As silly as that is. So I'm not going to call Magenta Plaza a bridge, but if you want to pass this canal, your only options to get to the other sides of the canal are Magenta Plaza, Centrico Plaza, or the Soul Rock Bridge. And especially with Wild Zones taking up a few of those, yes, you could walk around it. I'm sure folks aren't exactly happy with Wild Zones taking up so much space, especially with how little opportunities there are to pass the canal running through the entirety of the city. And at least in terms of the bridges of Lumio City that the civilians and visitors would be experiencing, that's it. But what about if you're trying to find a ghost girl who's avoiding her older brother? It's kind of ironic that the sewers became one of my favorite places in Lumio City, but I think it's just because it changes up the look of it so substantially throughout the game that it's like, oh man, I definitely want to show up here. So we can actually see this one little metal grate right here so that you don't get your feet wet as you're walking along. And it makes sense. It's rusted, it's dirty, it's just kind of slapped on there. But of course it is. Most people aren't going to be walking through here. And as we continue, we see this giant bridge right here. So there is water pooling at the bottom. And we can even see where that water is showing up and running off to this pooling. But because it's not moving water, we can actually see that the columns that are actually submerged in the water are flat. They don't have the pointed edges like the Soul Rock Bridge. But another cool thing, since this is a sewer with all of the piping, we can see the pipes going through and along the side of the bridge, which is pretty neat. We can see this other bridge here. And funny enough, we can actually see a bridge that us, the player, can't access right there. That little metal grate slapped across. But I really like these bridges as it just gives a wholly unique feel. Of course, it's going to be run down. You can walk through little puddles. And it even picks up on the sound effects and everything. And yeah, there are little guardrails, but they've got plenty of wear and tear to them. And it makes sense. Most people aren't going to be going here. For the sake of the service workers that work a very hard job in Lumio City, yeah, they're going to need something so that they can go on through. But it's not having to worry about any visual clarity, or at least worrying about the aesthetics of the city. And for the bridges of Lumio City, that's it. And by extension, the bridges in Pokémon Legends ZA. I was really hoping that there were going to be more bridges in the various sectors, especially to give each of the sectors more of a unique identity. I do like that each of them have their own manhole cover and Pokemon associated with it, because that's really cool. And at least when I was first looking into this, I thought it was going to be something similar. Unfortunately, that's not the case. But that's okay. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you enjoyed looking at the bridges with me. I'll absolutely be doing this with Scarlet and Violet soon, so if you want to see those bridges and hear me gush and talk about them, make sure you subscribe and leave a like. Thank you so much for watching. I've been morggyshark, and I'll see you next time.